What up? What up? Hope you guys are ready to do some AP Human Geography review. Great. Last week we finished up looking at a review of geopolitics, Unit 4. This week we're going to start moving into agriculture, Unit 5. So check it out. We are at Unit 5 of the course. All right, you guys are probably somewhere, unless you're doing like a semester-long course or something like that, you're probably in about the same area, moving through Unit 4, the political geography unit, into agriculture. So we got Unit 5, 6, and 7, and bam, that's it, y'all. So we are getting there. It might feel like the end will never come and you'll never see the light at the end of the tunnel, but just know that your course that you are currently in, human geography, is going to be over with before you know it. So we're going to go ahead and get started because I got a lot to share with you, and hopefully we'll have enough time to get done in an hour. So social media stuff, I basically have just copy and paste the slide template, and I'll leave this in every single time. So that's there. That's my stuff. Wanted to show this to you guys as well. This is from last week too. All Fiveable live streams, including this one right here, doesn't cost you anything to listen to. Now, if you want to go back and get the recordings because you're getting close to AP Human Geography exam time and you're ready to review a little bit, you're going to want to go in and get the membership so you can see the recordings. Now, also, the recordings, and let me just do this real quick because I forgot to put my, where is it? I'm sorry, while I'm thinking about it, I want to put my pointer on, I want to put my captions on. Bam. Okay, so what I was saying is, not only would you get AP Human Geography review for the membership, so like the Fiveable Plus, but you would also be able to listen to any other lectures from any other AP Human Geography, any AP subject. All right, so if you're in AP World or wherever else that we offer, then you would have access to both my videos as well as Miss Duamerol's videos for AP World. So just wanted to make sure that you guys knew that was going down. All right. Hey, and also, like it says, if you guys are finding that this is helpful, tell people about it. Let's see if we can get the numbers more than in the teens. We should have 100 people on these lab reviews. So if it's helpful for your friends, tell them to come in here. Heck, man, bring your teacher along. Tell them to give you extra credit if you guys are listening to these things and they pop on and see your names. There's all kinds of different ways you guys can get extra exposure to the course content. And I want to give it to you. So let's do this. Objectives. Today, we're talking about the development of agriculture, right? So you might be thinking to yourself, wow, this class, man, what the heck? We talk about population. We talk about things like maps and place and space and all this good stuff. We talk about culture and I guess geopolitics and globalization. All these things kind of make sense a little bit with geography, but how the heck is agriculture going to fit into this? Well, one of the things that I didn't put in my objectives that we're going to talk about right here towards the end is all the ways that agriculture has already kind of been seen in the units that we've studied in the course. Okay, so it totally connects with literally every other unit, and that right there is the reason why we are learning about it in this class. So now, obviously, if you guys have any questions, come down here and hit the little ask a question, and I'll get to that. You can put it in the dialogue as well if you want to, but I just discovered that I should have been time stamping the ask a question. So if you guys go in there asking me a question, I'll take the time to answer it, and then that way we'll be able to find it later on. Let's get started. All right, so you can't really talk about the invention of agriculture without looking first at kind of the, I guess I wouldn't say invention is not the right word, but the peopling of the earth. How did humans live before agriculture? If it was invented, that means there's a point where agriculture started. There's a point where before agriculture started, and that's what we got to look at first. Humans began in Africa, all right? And so they would have used tools. They would have communicated. All right, we talk all the time. That's the thing that separates us from like dogs and other kinds of animals that only make a few different kinds of sounds or whatnot. They can't string words together that have any kind of meaning, and they're not capable of complex thought in the same way that we are. So they can't really work together in teams in the same way that we can. Plus, we are able to invent all these cool tools and things like that to help us basically get the job done. So humans were pretty good pack animals, for lack of a better way to say it. We were really good at hunting. So typically in a hunter-gatherer society, which is how human beings live for the majority of human history, men would be the ones that did a lot of the hunting. Women were the ones who did most of the gathering, and they would gather things like nuts, roots, berries, something like that we can eat. All right. this is not really because women were seen as inferior to men. Now, that's one thing that a lot of people get mistaken whenever they study this stuff, is that, gender stratification has always existed. Women have always been considered less than. It's really not that. Okay. In the same way that people in, athletic teams, if you're looking at a football team, you got your biggest people are going to be linemen. Your fast, agile people that can catch are going to be your wide receivers. The person who throws the best is going to be the quarterback. In the same way, men typically are just going to be a little taller, a little stronger, a little faster than women are going to be. It makes sense that they're going to be the ones doing the hunting. All right. Among other reasons. One of those reasons may be that if you have kids, women are going to be the ones to nurse a kid every time. Today we have things like, thank God, formula, which both my kids used formula because we had problems with nursing, and thank God we live in 2000 and something teens, so we could do that. But for the majority of human history, that was not an option, and women were the ones that did nursing. So that's perhaps another reason. And men typically excel in strengths, as we just said that. By the way, this word comparative advantage, I didn't just make that up. That is actually a term used in economics to refer to someone who is better at producing a good than another, say, country, another economy. All right. In the same way, comparative advantage in this case is if men are stronger and faster and more agile and all these different things, they should be the ones that are doing the hunting because it makes sense, right? Here are some examples of human beings as pack animals. That's really not the word to use, but we worked really well together and communicated very well. We could basically ambush animals much in the same way as you see here. Woolly mammoth didn't last very long. A lot of reasons for that, perhaps, but there were very large animals that used to live in certain continents like Africa and Australia. They're not there anymore, and a lot of that's because we overhunted them because we're good at hunting. Hunter-gatherers traveled in small groups, right? And they moved from place to place in cyclic patterns. No, they weren't just randomly moving around, running all over Africa, trying to figure out, hey, well, let's just go wherever the wind takes us. No, there was a method to the madness, all right? Essentially, they're going to places where they have an abundance of food. When they hunt the area out and all the animals are gone, they're going to go in other areas where there's going to be more animals aplenty. Now, why are they traveling in small groups? Why are hunter-gatherers traveling in small groups? This actually makes a lot of sense. You can't take a pack of 150 or 200 people, half of which are men, hunting for animals and anything that's going to feed close to that many people in the plains of Africa. You can't do it. So they had to travel in small groups in order to actually be effective at hunting. It's one of those things where, like, it's great to have a team, but you have too many people on the team and everything's going to suck. I play a lot of ultimate frisbee on the weekends, guys. And one thing that my group doesn't do, for whatever reason, I don't really know why they do this. They don't like to split into different teams, and they don't like to sub out like you would according to league rules. And so what happens is we end up having, like, in the middle of the summer, we'll have 40 people show up. We'll have two teams of like 15 people playing, and then all it is a bunch of people just throwing the frisbee as far as they can across the field in hopes that someone tall and skinny will be able to jump up there and catch it. And there's really no strategy, and it's not really fun. In the same way, if you've got a ton of people out there hunting, you're going to scare away all the animals. You're going to never catch anything to feed your family. So what the heck? You can't have a ton of people if you're going to be living like this. Another reason for that is because babies can't move as fast as adults. In fact, honestly, I mean, even toddlers are super slow. I've got a 3-year-old. Y'all probably hear her screaming in there right now. And y'all, she ain't fast. All right? So just to put it out there, babies going to slow down groups. So if they get to a new location, they have babies and they have 40 babies, and they can't carry them around, they can't survive. And so you would even see, sadly enough, there's a lot of cases where perhaps in hunter-gatherer societies, babies would have not made it. They may not have made it if they had to move to look for food. All right. So the moral of the story is they weren't having a whole lot of babies, and also life expectancy would have been very, very low. But by some studies, they actually believe that life expectancy may not have been quite as low, or at least kind of neck and neck with after we became a cell society. All that Unit 2 stuff. But another thing, could not move in search of food if children wouldn't keep up. I just said that. Also, if groups are large, then huge amounts of food would have to be hunted and gathered. So you would run out of resources very, very fast. So groups were extremely small. Since groups were extremely small, they weren't having a whole lot of babies. They had to support themselves. The population really didn't grow and was extremely small. There was at one point in the history of modern humans where in Africa, there might have been somewhere around 100,000 human beings. And that's it, all right? We got more than that and a lot more than that in the state of South Carolina, which is where I'm from. Here's a map that shows the population of the earth over time. And you notice that you've seen this already. I mean, human beings really didn't populate that much until you got Jesus right here. I'm sorry, no, you got Jesus right here. So by the time of Jesus, you've got way less than 1 billion people on earth. And then it creeps up a little bit throughout maybe the Renaissance period. Then you get the Industrial Revolution and shoot, just like that. We're going to talk more about that even in this particular review, but definitely in development when we start looking at the Industrial Revolution. But despite the fact that human populations were really low during hunter-gatherer times, growing populations, the population did still grow, and it still grew very regionally where people were going to be in the continent of Africa. And this would have led to less food being available. As I said, human beings were pretty good hunters. All the large game that existed out there, like the woolly rhino and all these other things, like woolly mammoths and things like that, just eventually disappeared. People had to end up moving around to where, the other continents and start to really migrate outward. And again, you may or may not have studied this in Unit 2. There is actually a really good video. There's a few videos that I might can think of, but one that I know exactly what it is. If you get a chance to go on like Amazon, I believe Amazon Prime is completely free. I paid $2 for it, but the first episode of the story of all of us, it's there we go. The transcript picked it up. The first episode of that TV show spends the first maybe 22 minutes talking about exactly this concept here. In fact, it's really a pretty good. I need to add that to the end of the resources here in this PowerPoint. That's a really good thing for you guys to watch if you ever get around to it. Just the first 22 minutes echoes a lot of what I'm saying in here. Hunter-gatherer lifestyles lasted about 200,000 years. But then things start changing like crazy. Actually, I probably should have looked at that. I want to say 200,000 is about right. It might be a little more, a little less. Bam, the Ice Age is going to end. Okay, so if you look at right here, what you're looking at is 10,000 BCE to present. And now, part of the reason for that is because 10,000 years is a huge amount of time. That's like a stupid huge amount of time. The other reason for that is because that's about the time the Ice Age ended. And that's roughly the time that we started to discover agriculture. All right. And that brings us to the first agricultural revolution. If you guys are writing stuff down, you want to know it by two names. You want to write down the first agricultural revolution. You also want to write down Neolithic Revolution. Now, you don't need to know Neolithic demographic transition or agricultural revolution or anything. Just know that when you're talking about the invention of agriculture, you're looking at the first agricultural revolution. You're looking at the Neolithic Revolution. And those two words mean the same thing. Now, literally, the word Neolithic means the new Stone Age. So if you're studying like anthropology and ancient world history, the Paleolithic period is going to be the old Stone Age. The Neolithic Revolution is going to, or Neolithic period refers to when people started to not move around so much. They chose to stop moving around and chose to start settling down in settled societies. Your earliest towns and cities started to emerge because of the Neolithic Revolution, the invention of agriculture. All right. Climate change. Okay, so the end of the Ice Age, all right, it was really icy. Now all of a sudden it's not. This is climate change, all right? It's always been a thing. If you guys study climate change or even do a simple Google search for like the history of climate change, you can see there's a lot of different things historically where the climate's going to switch. In fact, if you probably a better search would be a search of ice ages. All right, there's way more than just a couple of ice ages that happened in really, really distant past. People would argue that we are still in current phases of ice ages and things like that right now. There's one ice age that happened during or leading up to the French Revolution. So there's all kinds of different times where climate has changed simply because of having to do with really the access of the sunlight to the earth. Okay, so I took this here from looks like a little question and answer for like elementary school students. But this here is essentially summing up what causes the kind of climate change I'm looking at here. Scientists are still working to understand what causes ice ages. One important factor is the amount of light that the earth receives from the sun. The amount of sunlight that reaches the earth can vary a lot, mainly due to three factors. There they are. First, how much the earth is tilted relative to the sun. Now, I'm not sure if y'all know this, but the earth it doesn't just rotate in a perfect, it actually is like a top. So if you spin a top and it starts to wobble a little bit, that's what the earth does on its axis. When it does this, the sun hits the earth in a different angle, causing there to be sometimes warmer, sometimes cooler temperatures. All right, so that's a lot of it right there, to be honest. These other things as well kind of factor in, and we're not talking like dramatic, changes here. So when we talk about the last ice age, everything was really icy all the way up until like the mid latitudes. When that melted and receded, that was dramatic. All right. So what we're looking at here is dramatic by it can affect the way we live, like it did leading up to the French Revolution, but it's not as dramatic as you might think when you hear about the word ice age. Nevertheless, when warming occurred and ended the last ice age, humans have begun to inhabit and adapt in many different parts of the earth. All right. One thing that humans do is they throw the trash away. We're trashy people. What do you know? And so we throw stuff away in designated areas that we don't use, our waste material. There are, it's very possible that this right here might have led to domestication of the dog, for one. Some, I want to say that to say that dogs and wolves are the same, they're a different species. My understanding is that they can't even breed, but they have the same ancestry. This ancestral dog, a lot of them would have developed. Apparently, I may be saying this wrong. I'm not a super expert, but just kind of like a nutshell version of the story. Dogs started to develop some kind of a gene where they weren't so afraid of, or were, I guess, more tolerant of people. They would possibly rummage through trash, and this eventually will have led to possible dog domestication. This happened 10,000 years ago-ish. So somewhere between 10,000 and 8,000 BCE. That's when you've got the domestication of the dog occurring. This happened actually before agriculture. So just a few things I want to sum up and make sure that we are on the same page on. One, the climate change that's happening today isn't the same necessarily as what I'm talking about here. When we talk about human-induced climate change, we're talking about the use of fossil fuels, releasing carbon that's been under the earth for millions and millions and millions and millions of years. Now it's being released into our air and causing an atmospheric greenhouse effect. And that right there is the human-induced climate change that's in our news today. This is not the same as this, but I want to make sure I made that point. The other thing that I want to say here is that well, I guess I forgot. It'll come back to me. So anyway, I was talking about the domestication of the dog, the invention. Dang, I totally lost my train of thought there. But that's okay. We'll figure it out. Women were probably the ones that discovered agriculture. Women were gatherers during hunter-gatherer societies. Okay, they're likely to notice that as weather warmed up, areas where they tossed their scraps would have possibly produced crops. Other things that you might well have done is cut things down. Like, so if you're a kid, what kid has never grabbed a stick and run through the woods like you're playing, I don't know, some kind of a superhero with a sword and cut things down? Or even better yet, you find like some kind of a machete or something in the woods and you pick that up and go get in all kinds of crazy trouble with that, cutting things down. Well, if you go back to that area, you probably notice that a lot of the things you cut down start to grow back again. I have some trees out here in my yard that I cut down, and I left the stump like about waist high. And every single spring, I have to go in there and cut the limbs off of it because they continue to grow. So it's not hard to understand how people will have discovered that things grow when you throw seeds in the ground, and things grow when you cut them down. All right. So they eventually discovered that under certain circumstances, you might get better results with your crops. So when it rains, and the grass grows, an inch in one day, they will have noticed that kind of thing too with the crops of their days. And so eventually people started experimenting a little bit, probably women. And what they would do is they would perhaps fence off a certain area or protect a certain area where a crop can grow without any kind of other things getting in the way. They might take the time to water it. And they realized that they could cultivate the earth. Holy crap. What in the world does cultivate mean? This one here is a really important word, and so is the word agriculture, right? We've already talked about culture, and one of the things that I'm pretty sure I said this in one of my earlier reviews, because I was at this point doing the reviews for you guys, is that when you look at the word culture, it means to care for, all right? So agriculture, cultivate, and culture as in the things that we care about culturally, they all come from the same root, meaning to care for, right? So when you cultivate the earth to produce more crops, you are actually caring for the earth in a way that allows it to grow crops for you, okay? That's really important. So when people start to cultivate the earth during the Neolithic Revolution, they started to realize that this seemed like a good deal for them, all right? I could imagine waking up I already hate to get up at 6:45 and get to bed get to work at 8 o'clock and work. Who wants to go to work? Not that I hate my job. I love my job. But I just would rather stay home usually. And so in the same way, if you're a hunter-gatherer, I could imagine having to wake up and go out there and hunt your food every single day or however often they had to do this just to survive. So the stakes are way smaller for me. Yeah, I need a job to survive. But if I wake up and I can't do my job, I'm going to be okay. Well, they realized you didn't have to move around so much. All right, you could have surplus food. Also, this could support a larger population. So, if I went back up there and I started looking at my chart that shows human population growth over time, because of Neolithic Revolution, that's the reason why ever so slightly you start to see that line perhaps go up a little bit towards when you get the birth of Jesus. A lot of civilizations had begun to flourish at that point, and populations started to increase. So this is a slide that I grabbed off the internet. It shows a little bit of what was happening before, a little bit of what happened after Neolithic Revolution. And these are the things, all right? Now this one here is debatable. Food shortages. I imagine that some people had food shortages. Over here, just because you have more people growing food systematically does not mean that you wouldn't have whole villages die out of things like famine. All right, so this happened quite a lot. Where especially if you're looking at the Tigris and Euphrates River Valley, for example, if you guys studied world history in 7th or 8th grade or something like that, you've got a lot of people here where the rivers wouldn't flood right. All right, the silt wouldn't cover the crops. You wouldn't have enough crops to feed the population. Usually, you did have food surpluses. So I would say that you had more food than not. But I don't know if you guys are going to read the article by Jared Diamond, another resource that I need to put in here. Called the worst mistake in the history of the human race or something like that. It's about agriculture being a mistake. And one of the reasons why he says this is because hunter-gatherers would have had a more varied diet. They ate nuts and berries and different types of root crops with all kinds of different nutrients and all kinds of access to different proteins and different things that are really good for you. They had a lot of meat from things that they hunted. So when we started systematic agriculture, one of the things you got to remember is that overwhelmingly people ate some kind of cereal crop for the majority of human history. All right. Well, these are the things that are very carb heavy, but not very protein heavy. So basically, they ate nothing but the things that today we try to stay away from if we're on a diet. The result of this is that people eventually started to shrink. So hunter-gatherers were built kind of like today's athletes. But you start looking at people living in civil societies, a lot of, especially the poorest of the poor, were actually very, very malnourished a lot of times because they didn't have enough variety. Their body actually shrunk, so people were shorter during this time period, and that much in the other. But anyway, the not trying to say this is not correct. What I'm trying to say is that there's different sides of every story, right? More or less, the after thing here, where people domesticate animals and food surpluses and large populations. Those are the things that I really want you guys to take from this. Also, specialization of different types of agriculture. That's important. The majority of people historically have been farmers, by the way, up until like in the last, I want to say maybe 2011 or 12 or something like that, about the time we hit 7 billion people on Earth, was also about the time, if I remember correctly, that we, for the first time, had a majority of people living in urban areas and not in rural areas globally. All right. So the majority of people up until your lifetimes were basically peasant farmers. During the Neolithic Revolution, plants and animals were domesticated. All right, when we talk about domesticated, that means that they were cultivated in a way they can be used for human consumption or whatever that might be. All right. So even a dog is going to be not consumed, but it's going to be something that we use for our own purpose and gain. And they were used to help out with agriculture. Other animals. Animal domestication may have started first. All right. A dog, for example, is as far back as 10 or 12,000 BCE. BCE, that's the other thing I was going to tell you. BCE means before the Common Era. CE means Common Era. It is the same thing. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the terminology. That's the reason why I'm saying. I'm from the South, so we have always used AD, and which is Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, and BC, which is before Christ. But this here is a more PC way of referring to the same thing. Agriculture first emerged in specific hearths or origins. All right, I should have a... Okay, we'll get to it in a second. I do have a map of this, okay? When I talk about hearth, what we're looking at, that's a vocab word you should know by now, all right? The start of something or the beginning of the origins of something. Agriculture was not invented by one person, okay? It was invented by like a bunch of different people living in a bunch of different regions on Earth where the different, I guess, what am I trying to say? Different things were in line to make that happen. Characteristics or whatever you want. All right, this here is an example of just a chart that shows a little bit maybe of the lineage of modern dogs. Very, very simplified, but it shows this idea of an ancestral dog, which is where wolves and all the different other breeds of dog that we know and love come from. Now, again, biology's sake, I mean, I've heard of things like, I guess there's a ton of books and stuff like White Fang and all that where dogs and wolves can procreate and all that, but apparently that can't happen because they're different species. All dogs can procreate. Wolves are not in the same as dogs. They're of the dog family. Okay, there's your biology lesson for the day. So that brings us to this dude, Carl Sauer. Now, you may have already heard of Carl. Oh boy, Carl. All right, he is the guy that your book, if you use Rubenstein's book, it's named after the cultural landscape, which is kind of his thing. Okay. But he also looked at origins of agriculture and determined that vegetative agriculture preceded seed agriculture. All right, so what that means is that originally people would have cultivated crops by essentially moving your stems or roots or whatever it might be from one place to another where they were able to make the conditions more suitable for agriculture. There's people that disagree with that. All right, so it's in the course description. You guys know this, I guess this stuff here, but so I wanted to make sure I talked about it. But just it's debatable. People discovered that plants grow better with certain conditions. I just mentioned that. They would move or cultivate those plants in certain areas. And one of the first areas where you would see vegetative agriculture would have been Southeast Asia. All right, where according to Carl Sauer, you will have seen things like taro. This is taro. You have seen things like yams. There is a yam. That's a root crop cultivated through vegetative planting. You also would have seen in the same region things like coconut trees and banana trees and things like that being cultivated in Southeast Asia, right? Using vegetative agriculture. So I'm not asking you guys to be able to write a dissertation on this stuff. Heck, you can probably tell that I'm not the world's greatest expert at the topic of the ancient history and origins of agriculture, but on a surface, you're going to want to know these things that I'm looking at here: taro, yams, bananas, coconuts, things that were diffused using, I guess, start off and diffused using vegetative agriculture. Here is a map. This here comes from the Ethel Wood review book. Some of y'all might have that, and all I did was take a picture right out of it. Talked about the diffusion of vegetative planting because it shows kind of these arrows where there's your speculated hearth of where these things originate and then where they diffuse. So you've got here's the Southeast Asia region I'm just talking about. You've got places in the Middle East. All right, you got places in sub-Saharan Africa and in the Americas, and we're going to talk more about those places right now. This here is a map that shows a little bit more detail of the origins of certain crops. All right. So again, if you look in this same region that we're looking at, you can see some of the examples I just gave you, as well as many, many others. Now, you don't need to memorize this map and all these things, but if I were you, I'd probably know a few examples of where certain ones of these things would have emerged. All right. And again, just don't memorize this whole thing. I mean, if you don't know where it is, I wouldn't take the time to learn where it originated. But things like beans and yams that I just showed you, tea, coffee, things like that, I would take the time to know where it came from. Seed agriculture. Can't believe you guys had any questions yet. Any questions for me? Feel free to ask a question. Click a little ask a question at the bottom of your screen, and we'll put it in the comments if you guys have any questions. Seed agriculture, just like it sounds, you throw seeds in the ground, they turn into crops. And again, people would have probably figured this out accidentally, as I mentioned earlier. Today, the majority of agriculture is done using seed agriculture. Crosshauer believed that vegetative agriculture started first in Southeast Asia. I just mentioned that. Not all scholars just mentioned that as well. Many scholars or many people would say that agriculture would have originated in the Fertile Crescent region, which is that place right there. All right. So basic geography. If you guys don't know what you're looking at here, this is Saudi Arabia, or the Arabian Peninsula. Saudi Arabia is the biggest country on the Arabian Peninsula. This here is where Egypt is. This is the Nile River. So you're looking at this area kind of, usually you think about it as in like an area where Mesopotamia was, but this particular map puts it all the way to the upper and lower Egypt, the Nile River Valley. So nevertheless, this area here between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, all the way along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, that's usually what you consider the Fertile Crescent. And this here is where some of the earliest civilizations would have emerged, and where some of the this is where most animals were domesticated. This is where a lot of your earliest agriculture, in particular, like different types of cereal grains and things like that, emerged between these two rivers that would systematically flood, leaving this layer of silt on the ground that people use as natural fertilizer. This is Turkey, and then over here is like Iran and all that, and this here where Mesopotamia is would be modern day Iraq. So in Southwest Asia, right, which is this area here where the Fertile Crescent is, barley, wheat, lentils, olives, oats, rye, overwhelmingly different types of cereal grains would have been produced in mass because of the conditions made by those rivers. The most significant domesticated animals came from this area. Dogs were first domesticated here. Pigs, goats, cattle, sheep, all the different things that we still have today. Really, we haven't domesticated a heck of a lot of animals, y'all. But all the big ones, the ones that could be used the most for agriculture in terms of especially reducing labor of agriculture, emerged in this region, except for horses, which emerged a little bit further up in around the Caucasus region, or the Eurasian steppe, the same place where Indo-Europeans began to speak. All right, so also Southwest Asia is the first area where both plant agriculture and domesticated animal agriculture, plants and animals kind of going hand in hand. This is the first place where those two were kind of blended as a concept. So again, there's the map. Americas are known for things like squash, peppers, maize. Most of the world calls corn maize. I know in the United States we call it corn, right? Just know it by maize when you're speaking globally. Potatoes, beans, cotton, and so much more. All these things over here are unique to the Americas until I'm not there yet. I need to hurry up though. The Columbian Exchange. We can get that in just a second. Old world animals, pack animals, most of them originate in Europe. That's what I mean by old world. I'm going to skip a little bit because we're running out of time. This here is a map out of the Rubenstein book. The 10th edition is the one I have. I had 12th edition, but I had to give it back to school. But this should be in the 12th edition as well. It's showing basically the point of origin of some of the main animals that we need to be familiar with. I would not take the time to, like I said, memorize this map, but these little things here, that's easy to memorize. I would know where these animals started. Okay, we're going to, all right, here we go. So this here's what I wanted to show you guys. The Columbian Exchange. Write this down, super important stuff. After the 1500s, after the Spanish discovered, basically the Caribbean and Latin America and all that, and other countries start to go back and forth, one thing they started to do right off the bat is trade with Native Americans and learn from them and vice versa. So you got to think, for the first time in all the history of human beings, you've got people across the Atlantic Ocean interacting with each other. So these guys over here, all the agriculture they did in the Americas were like usually done by human labor. They didn't have things like mules and horses and things like that. So all those different types of animals moved over this way. Things like tobacco, things like sweet potatoes or any kind of potato or peppers. Or a lot of stuff that gives flavor to the food that we eat today comes from the Americas. Now, these guys did have things like certain spices and all that in Asia they used that also would flavor their food. But this is a huge swath of crops that these dudes never had over here. I mean, none of them. Not in Europe, not in Africa, not in Asia, none of them. And then also things like grapes, things like bananas, oranges, other types of citrus fruit, sugar cane, holy mess. Now, if there's anything you learn in 8th grade studying U.S. history is that sugar and all that would have been done in plantations in the Caribbean. And oranges come from places like Florida. But they didn't until the Columbian Exchange because they didn't exist in the Americas. Also, super important to know that Europeans brought over all the terrible diseases that they had largely started to at least build up a degree of tolerance to. Now, I'm not saying that people didn't die of flu and smallpox and all that. But when these diseases, in particular smallpox, moved over to the Americas, it wiped out the population. So you could talk about how guns and steel and all that kind of stuff led to the conquest of all the Latin American societies, but ultimately what really did it was disease. Check out this quote: "No medieval force, no matter how bloodthirsty, could have ever achieved such enormous levels of genocide. Instead, Europeans were aided by a deadly secret weapon they weren't even aware they were carrying: smallpox." Come from this website here. Guns, Germs, and Steel is a book written by Jared Diamond, the same guy who wrote the Worst Mistake article I just referenced. And that book talks about essentially how what it looks at human society. It looks at the question was centered on the idea of haves and have-nots. So hopefully you guys get a chance to read the book. I don't have time to look at it right now. Globalization is in other words, is the Columbian Exchange globalization? You can argue that even as far back as the Silk Road, that was a form of globalization. But if you want to look at truly global economic interdependence, I would say that it starts during the Columbian Exchange. Right. So, and the reason is because, again, it's truly global in this case. So modern globalization would begin during this period. Even though agriculture has multiple hearths and similar patterns of origin, different crops predominate in different areas. Now, here's the thing, too, about geography. So we learn about the why of where, right? The spatial perspective. Things like culture and climate have a huge impact on what kinds of crops are going to be grown in what kinds of places. So you look at climate. Certain crops don't grow so well in certain climate regions. All right, coffee, sugar, tea, these things grow in tropical climates. So I'm going to show you a map in a second. Grapes, olives, these are Mediterranean crops. Different types of citrus, things like that as well. Tobacco and cotton, you're going to see a lot of this in warm mid-latitude climates like the southern U.S., for example. Culture, some crops can be cultivated because just about anywhere, but are still largely grown and consumed in their places of origin. So, for example, if you look at rice, we associate rice with Asian food or Asian culture, right? You don't see all the pictures of these people bent over in their little rice farms with their little hats like Raiden wears in Mortal Kombat. You don't see that kind of thing happening in the Americas as much as you see pictures of that happening in Asia. Same for corn. Man, we grow the mess out of us some corn in the United States. We feed most of it to animals. We give a lot of it to ethanol fuel, and we eat some of it here and there. But dang, maize is still something that's primarily done in the United States. Here's a map that shows the regional output of cotton. Notice the latitude. Most of your cotton is done roughly in the same latitude and the same kind of climate regions. Tobacco, again, same kind of thing. Coffee production, here is a lot to look at, but just the point isn't the details. The point is the colors represent where coffee is being produced. You got different types of coffee. The yellow is Arabica coffee. The green is a mix of Arabica coffee and the other kind. And if you're drinking coffee at McDonald's or Starbucks or Dunkin' or almost anywhere where you've got actually good coffee, you're drinking Arabica beans. So this is the place. These are the places where the majority of coffee comes from. Again, they are tropical regions, places along really between the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. Another example that shows you quite literally the coffee belt, the bean belt between the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, with some of the main producers of some of our most special coffee blends that we like to consume in the developed world. That's another important thing that I want to point out to you, is that notice that if you're looking at tropical crops, they're almost overwhelmingly being produced in some of the poorest regions on Earth, but they're not to be consumed as much in these poor regions as much as they're to be consumed right here and right here and right here. Rice, same kind of thing. Maybe a little bit here in the United States. I know that there are some being produced in the U.S. I know some gets produced in my state. Then you've got some rice being produced in Africa, some here, but overwhelmingly in Asia. Along this, these climate regions as well. It's got to be kind of wet. Maize. Here's where the majority of the corn is being produced. China also produces a lot, and it looks like it goes in Mongolia as well, possibly. What is this? Wheat. Wheat being produced more or less in the same areas. Hey, by the way, another reason about wheat being produced in the United States and Europe. Okay, think about how mechanical agriculture is in the United States and Europe. We have huge farms and tons of machines and tractors and things like that are able to harvest these things in record time, compared to people in these regions where they're usually doing some form of double cropping, which means they're planting rice in the warm months and wheat in the colder months. All right, they're doing it by hand usually. Okay, so subsistence and commercial agriculture. When we talk about subsistence agriculture, that's people making enough food to subsist. In other words, to sustain themselves. All right. So for the majority of agricultural history, people have produced food for themselves and their family to consume. That's subsistence agriculture. It wasn't really until the next thing we're going to talk about, the second agricultural revolution, that you start. Agricultural revolution, that you start seeing commercial agriculture, or when people produce so much food that the purpose doesn't become anymore to sustain their family and themselves, but to sell for profit. That's the difference between commercial and subsistence agriculture. Subsistence happens overwhelmingly in developed countries. Commercial agriculture, I think I said that wrong. Subsistence happens overwhelmingly in developing countries. In other words, the poorest countries. And commercial agriculture happens overwhelmingly in the richest countries. All right, so which is going to be your developed countries. Now, the only exception here is that when you look at plantation agriculture, like sugar plantations and cotton plantations and tobacco plantations and things like this that you might have learned about in American history, and some of which still happens today, those are going to be farms that are owned usually by people that are heavily invested in or controlled by developed countries. In other words, they're a part of commercial agriculture, but they're practiced in LDCs. Other than that, most people in LDCs are practicing some form of subsistence. Now, one more thing that I want to point out here, and sorry about my kids if you guys are hearing that. One thing that I really want to make clear is that surplus crops in subsistence agriculture can be sold at market. But again, because they're making a ton of money, they're making enough to support themselves, and usually they turn around and spend it on other forms of agriculture, or in the next season, for example. Okay, commercial agriculture, the focus is on cash crops. What the heck is a cash crop? Things like cotton, things like tobacco, things like corn, things like sugar, and anything that be used a lot really by rich countries. Now, I'm being kind of sarcastic there, but yeah, I mean, if you're using a ton of cotton, you're making it into stuff to sell. I'm not saying that doesn't happen in countries, but they're sold in. A lot of it's produced in and then sold to developed countries. Tobacco is really a luxury crop. You're not, if you're poor and you're trying to put food on the table to support your family, you're not able to, literally can't afford to smoke something. It's not going to really even help to promote your life. And this is exactly, you got to pay to cure yourself. A lot of the corn that we use in the country is used to feed our animals. So that's part of the reason why we have so much corn being produced, is because we have tons of animals. And hey, you know what? do they have tons of animals in developing countries? Not as much as we do, because animals are expensive to maintain and expensive to sell, and we eat more of the meat that are being produced in other countries. And so there's a lot of corn for that reason. I'm about to show you guys a map about that as well. Sugar, same thing. Croplands and pastures cover about 1/3 of the Earth's free surface. According to this study, well, if you look at the map, what it's showing, I'm just going to talk about the map. What it's showing here is that in the blue areas, these are places where people produce food for themselves to eat, or the majority of food is produced for people to eat. Notice there's some yellow and red over here. That's because these are coffee-producing countries. Largely, they grow crops that they don't eat. They sell to the developed world. Now, a lot of the color that you see in Europe and the Americas is going to be like that corn we're talking about, or a lot of crops that are used as feed for livestock, because we need that in order to be able to eat the beef that we, or consume the beef, or grow the livestock and things like that we use to create beef. By the way, you might not know this, but when you start thinking about raising livestock, is incredibly is one of the I'm not going to say it because I'm not 100% sure. It's a huge methane production is a large contributor to things like climate change. Okay, if we could reduce the amount of our dependency on things like beef, for example, or eat less of that, then we could probably do it. It would be at least a little nudge in the right direction. That's what I'm trying to say. Commercial agriculture evolved during the Columbian Exchange, but changed dramatically during the Second Agricultural Revolution. All right, so we talked about the First Agricultural Revolution, also known as the Neolithic Revolution. Now we're looking at the Second Agricultural Revolution, also known as just the Second Agricultural Revolution. So almost everyone calls it that. If there's another name for it, I don't know what it is. One thing you will hear people say is that it coincides with, maybe even precedes a little bit, the Industrial Revolution. And that makes sense because the main key ingredient to the Second Agricultural Revolution is mechanization. In other words, the mechanization of agriculture. We have been able to, during this period, use things like the principles of the Industrial Revolution to greatly improve the way that we produce and are able to grow crops. All right, and we're going to talk about it, and we got to speed things up a little bit. I'm going to try. All right, so occurred just before and concurrently with the Industrial Revolution. The time period you're looking at is somewhere around the 1700, like the year 1700, up until maybe the 1850s or so. It was not something that happened overnight, but yeah, do want to remind you though of the word revolution, which I think I've got up here somewhere. I guess I didn't put it in. The word revolution is you think about it as an overthrow of a country or whatnot, but more of a broad general definition of a revolution is simply a sudden drastic change in something. Okay, so yes, when you overthrow your government, that is a sudden drastic change, right? But when you think about things like the industrial and the agricultural revolutions, you're not overthrowing people. And we talked about how the Neolithic Revolution happened over thousands of years. And how can that be a sudden change? Well, thousands of years in the midst of hundreds of thousands of years, that's pretty sudden. In this case, you're looking at a period about, like I said, 150 years-ish, give or take. And so when you're looking at the mechanization of agriculture, or the Second Agricultural Revolution, is a little bit more than just mechanization. The first thing I want to talk about is, well, these three factors kind of help promote the movement. And the first is the Enclosure Movement. Super important stuff. All right, so this happened first in Great Britain. And part of this is because all the conditions were right. I mean, no wars had been fought on British soil. They had a sense of security. They had the ability to maybe experiment more without the fear of Napoleon or someone coming in and taking over their farms and wrecking their land. So things like that didn't happen as much in Great Britain, so they were able to experiment. One thing that some of these richer farmers noticed is that the way they typically did agriculture was not very efficient. Here's how they did it. You would have a village and you would have common fields, and those common fields would be farmed by whatever peasants lived nearby them in whatever way they saw fit to do it. It's not very efficient. So what large landowners, aka rich dudes in Great Britain, started to do around the 1700s is they began to purchase large communal lands and then they enclosed them. They put fences around them like you see today in modern farms. And when they did this, they were able to now control whatever happens within their farm. So these rich dudes started to experiment, and they started to spend their money on things like experimenting with new kinds of ways to do fertilizer, new kinds of ways to distribute seeds, new kinds of ways to make cows more fat or things like this. And so this here is a huge part of what the second agricultural revolution was, or what caused it, is that people didn't just wake up and accidentally discover new ways of innovating farming. They learned those things through experimentation. It actually is very, very scientific when you think about it. The way they used to do things for so many years was this old medieval three-field system. If you guys study the Middle Ages, you probably have already studied the three-field system. And it's centered around the idea of leaving land fallow. All right, so what I mean by leaving land fallow is you simply don't grow anything on it. You're leaving it alone. You're not messing with it. So you've got wheat, barley, and then land being left fallow. Second year, you would rotate. You would move the barley here, the wheat here, and then you leave this field fallow, and so on. Well, if you're doing that, maybe you're not going to exhaust the land completely over time, but dang, man, you're not using 1/3 of your land. Well, what if you could use that last third of your land? So what this one guy named Townsend, his nickname was Turnip Townsend. What he did was he started to experiment with a 4-field system, and he discovered in the process that if you plant certain types of crops like turnips, that's the reason why he's called Turnip Townsend. If you plant turnips and other kinds of things like cloves into the earth, it will actually rejuvenate the earth and replenish it from the lost nutrients from things like other types of crops. Okay, and so I thought I had a picture of him, but that's what Townsend. That's the 4-field system that right there by itself enables higher yields and also less cost in a lot of different ways. So this radically improved agriculture. There is a video link at the end of this presentation. I'm going to show you a little bit more information about that. But basically what he did was you were able to use your whole field, not just 2/3 of it, the whole thing, and produce more food. You're able to produce food to feed your animals, and you didn't have to slaughter animals before the end of the year because they would have enough food to eat. So it radically increased yields right there. Jethro Tull, this guy here, not the singer from like the whatever several decades ago, created something we call the seed drill. Now, what this does is it allows you to make a line in which you kind of dig a hole and then plant a seed in it, which increase yields with less seeds. So again, it's a labor-saving device, it's a time-saving device, it's a money-saving device. Seeds went in the ground and produce crops. They didn't get eaten by birds and things like that. Today, that's what the seed drill looks like. So that's a modern example of it. Due to simply, as time goes on, we innovate things. Another reason why a lot of commercial agriculture is done in rich countries is because they have access to these things. The Rotherham plow made iron, made of iron. It was kind of a triangular shape. What they would do is they would hitch a mule or something to this, or I guess two horses. They would hook horses to it, and it would pull the plow, and it was lighter weight than the old plows they used, and would eat the earth way better and made plowing way easier. Again, today we don't do it like that. The mechanical reaper, this thing on the left, and I don't have the person who made it up there. I should have found that. I don't even know who it was, but the mechanical reaper was invented during this time period. It enables you to collect the harvest. This here is what modern mechanical reapers look like. So this here was a time and labor saving device. This today is the reason why you see such extensive commercial agriculture going on in the Midwestern U.S. Replaces this kind of labor. Stat. I'm sorry. I meant to say that kind of labor. So, and yeah, I need to watch a YouTube video to find out why this guy here ends up carrying a reaper or a scythe that is used to reap wheat. But here's what reapers were used for, or the scythe is actually used for harvesting the wheat in the same way that these things do. So I couldn't imagine going out into a field and doing this in order to harvest my crops, but that's what they did prior to the mechanical reaper. The cotton gin, simply, it separates the cotton from the seed and does a way better job than if you pick it by hand. So rather than have a million people try to pull seeds out of cotton by hand, you can free those people up to work on other things, while this machine does a better job at producing or getting the seeds separate, and also does more in a day. So it's in every conceivable way a win. Radically improve the way we produce cotton and also the output of cotton we produced. Selective breeding of livestock. I could not find a chart that shows this, but over time, people were able to use selective breeding tactics to radically increase the size of things like cattle and mutton, which is a type of sheep. Simply put, they chose their biggest and fattest animals and they bred those. And if you weren't big and fat, they didn't breed you with the other animals. They let you die. And so when you breed big fat cows and big fat sheep and all that, then you end up getting big fat animals. And so they were able to radically increase the amount of food that was produced by livestock in the same way. Now, today's agriculture, I guess the way that we do agriculture today is an extension of this period. We're far more scientific. Our machines are way more sophisticated. We use computers in all kinds of different ways. Also, another thing I want to point out is that the second agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution for that matter, primarily impacted, I guess, had the biggest impact on how agriculture is done in developed countries, in the rich countries. It affects mostly commercial agricultural output, right? Why? Why is it that its impact was biggest in developing countries? It had to do with the fact that you need capital. I would write this down. Capital is some kind of money or something that you have saved up that you can use to buy the tools or buy the resources needed in order to produce your good. All right. So if you want to start a business, the first thing you need is capital. In other words, you got to go to the bank, get a big loan so you have money to spend on your business. Same kind of thing here. In poor countries, even today, just like back then, you don't have the money to spend on the tools you need in order to practice agriculture. And so it builds on itself. The next step was producing different types of infrastructure in order to transport things. And what do you think the Industrial Revolution did with the invention of things like railroads and steamboats? So that's all that goes hand in hand. That's the reason why developed countries are the ones that benefit the most from this. Now, the last thing I wanted to end on, and I told you guys I was going to end on this concept. We talked about the Second Industrial Revolution. How does all this already connect to the things we've talked about in the course? You guys at this point have learned about basic geography stuff with maps and spatial perspective and the why of where. And you've learned about population geography. You've learned about culture. You learned about geopolitics. All this intertwined with what you've done so far. First, anytime food production has increased, so has the population. If you look back at our map, I'm not going to pull up the chart from the beginning of the presentation, but if you look back at that chart, food production increased due to more food. Population increased due to more food production. The more you have, the more people can eat. The more people are eating, the less they're starving to death, and the more that children grow up to be adults. And that's really kind of the simple way to put it. People live, and so populations increase. Remember Malthus? Remember when this guy talks about how population is going to level out because of these natural checks due to the fact that you've got all these people having to compete over things like limited food resources? Well, he was wrong, because the second agricultural revolution changed that. We were able to produce more food, and thus the population grew even more. Sorry, Malthus. Maybe next time, buddy. Also, settled societies grew, giving way to the rise of civilization. When you have civilization, there are certain characteristics. I should have put a chart. The characteristics of civilization are centered mostly on things like complex institutions like law and religion and education. Things like a writing system. Okay, so a lot of these people have sat down and learned how to write for the first time, and that's one of the cornerstones to modern education. Things like specialized labor. You got warriors, you have teachers, you have scribes, you have priests, you have, the list goes on. Different types of buildings and cities and things like this. And these are all parts of the elements of civilization that led to modern day culture. So all of these things happen because of agriculture. I've only got like another minute or two, y'all. I promise I'll let you go. The development of agriculture is also interwoven with early units because of second, the class divisions. you could argue, and Jared Diamond argues very well in his article I referenced about the worst mistake in human history, the idea that class divisions happened because during hunter-gatherer societies, there were no haves and have-nots. Okay, everyone worked for the collective good of the group, or else everyone died. Today, or I guess as soon as agriculture emerged, you start seeing some people who have more wealth than others, and they use that wealth, which was equivalent to power. I mean, these people become kings and nobility and all this kind of stuff that in some ways have really, I guess, caused the direction of human history, but also in so many ways have caused lots of problems for human history. So if you study the aristocracy, a lot of times they had the same characteristics as some of the hunter-gatherers in terms of their height and health, but the poorest of the poor didn't benefit as much from that. So the idea of haves and have-nots. Gender roles. Women's status declined because of agriculture, as men took the lead in most areas of these early societies. So men went from being the hunters and stuff to being the new chieftains, the leaders, and all this. And honestly, a lot of that probably is because they're not going to be able to take care of kids in the same way that women can. And so I guess it was easy for men to take power in ways that kind of subjugated women for most of human history. And so we're still trying to pick up the pieces of that disaster. Number 3, globalization. Globalization and diffusion and distribution of agriculture. These are all having to do with the spatial perspective, the why of where. Climate, culture, we just talked about these things being some of the reasons for why agriculture is where it is. All right, that's unit 1. That's the stuff we've already talked about. Contagious, relocation, hierarchical diffusion. You see where the diffusion of agriculture itself was through contagious diffusion, through hierarchical diffusion. Through relocation with the Columbian Exchange. All right, all these things show up. Different types of places, like for example, in Walmart, flowers from there probably come from the Caribbean. They probably come from other countries. Florida produces mostly oranges we eat. California produces huge amounts of the milk. Great Lakes with the cheese. All right, coffee, if you drink that, it comes from other parts of the world, not the country that you grew up in. So, in summary, that's it. In summary, I do have at least one video I want to show you on the next slide. Neolithic Revolution is also known as Agricultural Revolution. It occurred over the course of thousands of years in multiple places. The Columbian Exchange is the beginning of global trade. The second agricultural revolution is the mechanization of agriculture and so much more that led to higher yields and higher populations simultaneously. And agriculture can be seen in all facets of human geography. Mind blown, right? All right, so there's the video resource. If you go on YouTube, you type in cause of the Industrial Revolution, you'll get directly to the video that's linked there. It's a really cool, quick summary of some of the agricultural changes that happened leading up to the Industrial Revolution. So I wanted to leave that with you. When I do the resources for this, if you guys are on the Fiveable Plus, you have access to I'm going to try to find a link to the Jared Diamond article. And also I'll reference in there that Amazon Prime video that I mentioned. So that's all I got for you. Any questions for me? Thank you all so much for being here with me tonight. Again, tell your friends about it if it's helpful at all. Tell your teacher to come up here and you want to chat with them in the side while I'm talking about these AP Human Geography things. Next week, we continue in agriculture. Hope you guys have an awesome night. Peace out.